that same nonpartisan Inspector General testified, and I quote, "The IRS's existing fraud detection systems may not be capable of identifying ACA, or healthcare, refund or fraud schemes prior to the issuance of the tax refunds," end quote. Obviously, this is completely unacceptable, and I guess I would ask, how do you expect the American people to believe that their hard-earned tax dollars are going to be protected, and what are you doing about these long-standing, ongoing problems, and obviously the potential in the future, given the Inspector General's testimony?
Thank you for the question. I have a few responses. First, I think we could have a separate discussion about fraud and improper payments in other parts of the tax code, like the Earned Income Tax Credit. But let me spend some time on the Affordable Care Act. There's some differences with the way the Affordable Care Act and the IRS footprint works from EITC that I think is important to point out, because it actually is helpful in reducing the incidence of fraud. And there's two key things I want to share with you. First, when an individual comes in to get premium tax credit assistance, so where they're getting their tax credit under the ACA, no funds are actually shared directly with the taxpayer. That money goes to the insurance company. So that individual is never receiving the money. They're getting an economic benefit, access to insurance and less expensive premiums, but different from EITC where they're actually getting the money. Here,
But whether they qualify for the benefit will be up to them, right? Because now HHS has said they will self-authenticate or self-verify. They will say whether they qualify, correct?
well, we're going to, as I mentioned in my opening remarks, we provide HHS, and then they provide the marketplace, taxpayer information about those individuals and their income level. So
But
that,
at the time-
that information will help validate what their income may be in the future based on having that historical information of what their taxpayer data says now.
But I am correct on the self-authentication or self-verify that taxpayers will determine whether they qualify.
I'll leave that question for Mr. Cohen, but let me add one.
Mr. Cohen, am I correct on that?
No, we are going to verify the income that of every person who applies for subsidies through the marketplaces, and we're going to do that through.
But wait, just stop for a second. HHS announced that there's going to be a self-verification system. Did they not make that announcement?
We have we're actually going to be coming out with some additional guidance today, I think, or tomorrow.
Okay, but they did make that announcement.
We said that we were going to be doing a sampling, and we are now going to be announcing that we're going to be sampling 100%. We are going to be requesting documentation.
So there's new information that...
There's new information, correct.
And can you elaborate on that for us?
I can. So the way it's going to work is people say this is how much my income was, or is going to be. And that, what the person puts on the application is checked against available data sources from IRS, from Social Security in the event that they have disability income, and from Equifax, which is a well-known private company.
But you're not going to have their current taxpayer information until after they file.
No, this is so they'll be looking at the prior year's tax return. So
yes,
yeah. So
well,
if we can't match, if there isn't a match, if we can't verify, then we are going to ask for further information and documentation,
right,
such as pay stubs from every applicant.
All right, and why don't you
There was
continue?
just one other thing I wanted to add. In addition to the fact that the taxpayer itself does not receive funds, just receives the economic benefit because the money goes direct to the insurance company. The other point is that the IRS...
But they do get the subsidy.
They get a subsidy, but they never get cash in hand. They get a cheaper...
No, but in terms of the American taxpayer being protected from improper or fraudulent subsidies, that still is an outstanding issue. Whether the individual gets a cash payment or not, there still is a...
Completely agree. If there's a mistake there, it's a loss to the Treasury. But here's
which is the American people.
Right, absolutely. I agree. But if I can make one more point, which is the IRS will have a report from the exchange, and that report will have detailed information that will let us validate, does this individual have a relationship with the exchange? We'll know whether they've made their premium tax credit, made their premium payments. We'll have more information to reconcile that individual's tax return than we have in EITC and other cases. So there are some mitigating elements that will help us reduce the incidence of potential erroneous payments in this case.
Will the IRS enforce the mandate that businesses offer acceptable coverage next year?
So here's how that's going to work. I think what you're referring to is that we in future years, after the 15 filing season, will rely on an employer report, and that employer report will not be provided in this first year.
But next year, yes
Next
or
year,
no?
we are working on solutions to look at other alternative reports and information to help validate the employer offer. And that's kind of under development right now with the employer community, with the business community, in the light of the fact that the employer report is not going to occur until filing season 2016. We're working with employers now to look at alternative ways to validate their offer of coverage.
Well, did I not read the blog post properly that the employer mandate was delayed?
Yes, there's what we're calling the transition relief period, and in that case,
Which means it's delayed for a year.
yes, and the employer,
So-
right, and the employer report that was due in filing season 15 is now going to be due in filing season 16, but that doesn't mean we're not going to continue to work with businesses to understand what types of offer of health coverage.
But next year, the employer mandate will not be enforced.
That is correct.
That's the conclusion. Thank you for that.
That is correct.
But I do believe the IRS will enforce the individual mandate that average Americans have acceptable coverage next year. Is that correct?
Yes, the individual mandate is still in place.
So, I mean, one of the comments from the Inspector General for Tax Administration said that the IRS will need to ensure that tax returns accurately claim the various applicable ACA provisions, and above all, that taxpayers are treated fairly. And I guess my question for you is it fair that businesses, big businesses, are off the hook while the average taxpayer is going to be required to buy federally defined acceptable coverage through an individual mandate? How fair is that?
Well, my role in the IRS is to implement the laws. I rely on the Treasury Department to make certain decisions that are of a policy nature. I think the decision here and the issue of fairness and equity is a policy call that the Treasury Department made. I believe there's a balancing that goes on in terms of making sure that we're implementing the law as effectively as possible. The employers and the business community reached out, indicated a need for more time, and there was a balancing decision made that we should provide them that more time.
All right, thank you. And Mr. Cohen, I appreciate your openness about what HHS may be doing, and I think it just underscores how important this oversight hearing is on implementation, as we're seeing new developments on a daily basis in this area. So I think any concern that this is an unnecessary or hearing, I think, are certainly waved away by your comments. But let me just say that you've seen the rate filings for the plans being offered in the 34 federal exchanges, have you not?
We have had submissions from the issuers that will be offering in the federally facilitated
And they've come to you because that's your responsibility.
They've come to my office, yes.
But we obviously haven't seen them, and the American people haven't seen them. So my question to you is, will the average family in mid and northern Michigan see a $2,500 reduction in the premiums they pay?
We haven't released any data on the rates that have come into the federally facilitated marketplace. We are very careful at CMS, just as we do with the Part D program and the Medicare Advantage program. We only release that information once we have an agreement. We don't want to affect the market.
Well, the president promised that we'll lower premiums, I'm quoting, up to $2,500 for a typical family per year, end quote. Is that going to happen? And obviously we're a couple of months away from this being implemented. People are concerned about what their costs, how they're going to be able to meet these obligations. Is the average family in mid and northern Michigan going to see that kind of rate reduction?
I think that the average family in mid to northern Michigan will have in a marketplace more options and for better coverage at an affordable price once the Affordable Care Act is...
So they will see a $2,500 reduction?
I can't say. We're not releasing any information about
certainly
the data,
you can understand why citizens are concerned on what is going to be a very large expense for their families, that we can't even have any sort of prediction in terms of where this is going to be after several years of so-called implementation.
I actually think that predictions have proven not to be very useful. I think it would be more useful to look at the rates that states have actually released, which have in the 11 states.
But given the numbers you've seen, have you seen on average a $2,500 reduction?
We have seen a reduction if you compare apples to apples coverage, in a number of cases, yes, we have seen a reduction.
So the average family, you've seen a $2,500 reduction.
I can't speak to $2,500 specifically.
I mean, that's what the president promised.
Well, I'm not sure that's exactly what the president said, but
I'm quoting from him. Are you suggesting I'm not quoting him accurately?
I'm not.
I certainly
suggesting-
hope not.
I am not suggesting that at all. I'm just saying
All right.
I'm not sure what the president said.
All right, with that, I'll turn it over to Mr. Levin.